This year marked 50 years since the signing of the Helsinki Final Act. It enshrined a set of principles on how states should treat each other and their citizens. The anniversary event in Helsinki should have been celebrated amongst decades of peace and stability these principles helped secure. Instead, it took place amid the biggest war in Europe since the 1940s, Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. As we said at the OSCE Ministerial Council last week, Russia has trampled on the Helsinki Final Act and violated every OSCE commitment. Through the OSCE and other multilateral fora, we must maintain relentless scrutiny of Russia's unjustifiable war and hold it accountable. Thanks to the efforts of President Trump and Ukraine's constructive engagement, there has been progress towards ending this war. But the journey will be difficult as long as President Putin shows no sign of negotiating in good faith. The UK remains committed to supporting Ukraine's pursuit of a just and lasting peace, which safeguards its sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. Should it be called upon, the OSCE has the tools and experience to help Ukraine recover and rebuild, from monitoring ceasefires to decommissioning weapons and supporting veterans' reintegration. Meanwhile, Russia seeks to weaken Western resolve, a misguided endeavour. Russian proxies have conducted malicious acts of sabotage across Europe, while an industrial scale of information manipulation is designed to destabilise societies. Bilaterally, we are taking robust action to counter these threats. Last Thursday, the UK government sanctioned the GRU in its entirety and individuals behind state-sponsored hostile acts across Europe, including on UK soil. This was in response to the publication of the Dawn Sturgis inquiry in the UK. That report confirmed that Russia's reckless use of a military-grade nerve agent on UK soil in 2018 led to the tragic death of a British citizen. These threats are wide-ranging, so for our response to be effective, it must be collective. This makes multilateral organisations like the OSCE vital. The OSCE's principles of cooperation should also help us tackle another growing issue, irregular migration and the illicit finance that fuels it, a top UK priority. The OSCE could do more to support states strengthen border security. Colleagues, the principles agreed in Helsinki, alongside the UN Charter, continue to be the foundation of true security in Europe. The United Kingdom remains steadfast in our support for the OSCE. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. We didn't have any high expectations regarding today's intervention from the chairperson in office, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland, Ms. Elina Valtonen. After all, the Finnish chairmanship throughout this year has systematically and consistently exacerbated the crisis in our organization, driving to absurdity the total Ukrainization of the OSCE's agenda. As a result, the OSCE does not play any kind of significant role, not even in those areas where it has the mandate and potential to do so. Spheres of genuine cooperation have been reduced to very narrow secondary issues. Meanwhile, the elephant in the room, that is the European security crisis provoked by NATO countries, is something that the CIO is trying not to notice. The only thing it is doing is groundlessly and despite the facts, pinning responsibility for the consequences of these steps on Russia. So should we really be surprised that our pan-European organization, which 50 years ago laid the groundwork for peaceful coexistence and cooperation in Europe, should we be surprised that no one even remembers it today? If you, Madam Minister, set yourself this as your objective a year ago, well, then we can congratulate you on successfully implementing this objective. Moreover, unfortunately, we've gotten used to the fact that interventions in this chamber of CIOs over the last few years are conducted in violation of their mandate, which is clearly circumscribed, in particular in decisions adopted by the Ministerial Council of the OSCE in Porto in 2002. And let me quote, the CIO should ensure that its actions are not inconsistent with positions agreed by all participating states and that the whole spectrum of opinions of participating states is taken into account, end of quote. As you've just aptly demonstrated, our Finnish colleagues aren't striving to do anything of the sort. On behalf of the OSCE, they are promoting a strictly Western, flawed, anti-Russian narrative. I'd like to remind you, Ms. Valtonen, that the CIO does not have the right to change the parameters of the organization's functioning to serve their national ambitions, nor the wishes of specific groups of countries. After all, currently in the OSCE, there is no shared understanding of the reasons and prospects of the settlement of the crisis in Ukraine. It follows that speaking about this on behalf of the OSCE is something you have no right to do. You have just a few more weeks left at the helm of the organization, yet you haven't grasped the basic principles of how the organization functions, nor have your colleagues. You've showed that to us today. The main principle is, of course, the principle of consensus, which is the cornerstone of all of the OSCE's work. During the Finnish leadership, what was promoted actively was the tactic of segmenting discussions into small groups. The objective here is plain as day, excluding countries that aren't to your liking, first and foremost Russia, from these discussions and laying the groundwork for a departure from this key OSCE principle, consensus. All of this was done throughout 2005 under the heading of dubious reforms within the so-called Helsinki plus 50 process. If the organization continues down this course, well, soon we'll probably have to talk about it in the past tense. Madam President, now I won't spend any time repudiating the anti-Russian insinuations in the context of Ukraine, which we heard today. It's clear as day where things stand on the Ukrainian settlement process. The corrupt Ukrainian princeling, who continues to violate basic human rights and freedoms in Ukraine, is aiming to cling on to power and everything he's stolen over these last few years from his people at any cost, even if it means turning his entire populace into cannon fodder to be used up on the front lines. Meanwhile, his European accomplices, who are trying to do everything to avoid an inglorious collapse of their anti-Russia project, are busy torpedoing the peace efforts of the US and the Russian leadership, undermining the infamous spirit of Anchorage. History will judge them for this mercilessly. Instead, I'd like to address the incoming CIO Switzerland, which will be taking the OSCE wheel at a decisive moment for the organization. Colleagues, to a large extent, the organization's future depends on you, as does the OSCE's relevance within the framework of the process of trying to figure out a European security formula that's agreeable to all, a process which might begin very soon. You'd think who but the OSCE, given its mandate, its long-standing experience and pan-European nature, who else can play this key role? Yet the OSCE's ability to play this role remains to be proven, given that it has discredited itself, demonstrating its uselessness thanks to the efforts of the Finnish chairmanship and the chairmanships of a number of its predecessors. In order to bring the organization back to life, we'll have our work cut out for us. We'll need to cast aside stereotypes and nefarious practices which are hanging over the organization right now like the sword of Damocles. The OSCE must no longer be used as an instrument for promoting Western interests east of Vienna. As I said earlier, what must also end is the artificial total Ukrainization of the OSCE's agenda, which has pushed the organization to the sidelines of international affairs. Madam President, dialogue and a serious, frank discussion at the OSCE is not only possible, but it's also very necessary, not only in Europe, but the world over. Only absolutely irresponsible politicians would be uninterested in reducing the level of military and political confrontation and in seeking to overcome the divide we see in Europe. They're the ones who, despite pan-European interests, are today without reason portraying Russia as the enemy and trying to make a future war with Russia a core objective for all Europeans. This is madness. This is an attempt to brainwash the European populace. But there are some sensible forces on our continent who are trying to counter these efforts with dialogue. We were and remain open to such dialogue. The prerequisite for its success is our ability to revert to the fundamental principle of indivisible security, which implies the equal rights of each participating state to security, as well as a refusal to strengthen one's own security at the expense of the security of others. As per this cornerstone, this paradigm, not a single group of states can claim to bear primary responsibility for maintaining peace and security in the OSCE region, nor can it view any part of that OSCE region as its own sphere of influence. Western states have been holding this principle in contempt, and as a result, what's fallen by the wayside are such important documents as the European Security Charter, dated 1999, and the Astana Declaration, dated 2010, documents which enshrine that very principle. Today, it's plain as day that the current confrontation surrounding Ukraine could have been avoided if only all states which signed up to the aforementioned agreements had meticulously implemented them. Instead, the West opted for expansion of NATO and violated their undertakings within the OSCE. Madam President, it's no exaggeration to say that the OSCE stands on the edge of the precipice. Work across all of its security dimensions, the military and political, the economic, environmental, and the humanitarian one, is basically paralyzed. We've almost lost its singular military and political toolkit, the OSCE's toolkit. Traditional activities aimed at combating global transnational threats are not being conducted. Consensus-based conferences have been replaced with ersatz events. The highly politicized humanitarian basket has been infiltrated with the neoliberal narratives. Against this backdrop, the Russian Federation, as a participating state of the OSCE, has every reason to expect that Switzerland will be as equidistant as possible, acting solely on behalf of all 57 participating states. We are counting on the future chairmanship to facilitate dialogue and cooperation between participating states, as well as to resolve any differences between these participating states. To this end, it's important to safeguard consensus as the basic principle for the OSCE's work, because if we don't have consensus, we won't have an organization. We expect that Bern, if Bern is genuinely set on saving this pan-European organization, which is supposed to promote cooperation and resolve any problems on this path, we believe that Bern is up to the task of at last opting in the coming year for unifying cooperation at the OSCE, casting aside any negative assets on the side of the ledger. In this scenario is something we're very interested in. Whereas our European colleagues, can they cast aside Russophobia and, in the name of a peaceful future, do away with any anti-Russian narratives? We have serious doubts about that. I thank you.